Hello, everybody. In this lesson, we're going to talk about planning your research and generating your research question. Now, it may seem like this is really early in the process, but it takes time to develop a research question, and having a good background and understanding is going to be important. Also, as you go through the course, it's going to be important to have an idea of what you want to do because it'll add some context to the assignments that you'll be required to do throughout the course as you build towards your final research proposal. So hopefully this lesson will give you some ideas about things to think about in terms of developing your research question, and then that then will help with your developing of your project itself. So where do research ideas come from? They come from a number of places. So, I mean, why do researchers study topics in the field of kinesiology to begin with? Well, it might be because of curiosity. There might be something that an individual has been looking at, thinking about for some time, and they want to learn more about it. There might be some enjoyment. There might be some particular area that you enjoy and you want to learn more about. That could be an area. Social context of their lives, your environment. There might be some environmental issue or something, not environmental issue per se in terms of the environment, but where you live, how you live, things you observe. There might be some things that you want to, that might influence you in terms of your ideas that might have effect on what you want to do your research project on. There might be some recent or ongoing social phenomenon. The most recent one that we can all relate to is COVID, for example. There were a lot of research on COVID over the last several years because of what's happening in society. So there might be something that you might observe or notice in society that you might want to know more about. There could be also a lack of understanding of something. So, simply put, there's a lot of times that people believe X and it turned out to be Y, or the people just don't have a good grasp of why something is happening the way they are doing it. Particularly, why is someone training a particular way and having out the outcomes that they do? Well, you might want to have more of an understanding of why that is. Doing research in that area will help us have a better understanding. So, these are just several ideas that might generate or where your idea might come from. So just keep that in mind as we generate your question for your research project. Some informal or formal sources of research ideas. If you, this is really kind of a gamut running from the informal to the formal. So in the informal, this is you might start with a research idea, developing the idea by just simple thinking about that. Oh, this is interesting. I want to know more about it. Or it could be start to have, oh, this is now a problem. You identify it's interesting, but now you've identified a problem. I want to find the best way to solve that problem. Then you decide, oh, what has been done previously on this? There's always some previous research generally that answered some of your questions that you might have had in this particular area, but there are still some unanswered questions. And finally, once you do some background research or literature review, you do more formally. You start to contextualize, you start to come up with a research question, and you have theory says that people should behave this way. Let's test that theory. So you have a little bit more of a focused area of research, but it starts more informal with, I have an interesting idea. You identify a problem, see what's been done, and then you have more of a formal theory that you think may or may not actually occur. And let's go ahead and study that. So that's kind of your thought process as you start to develop your idea along the way is you know, start out with something broad and then start to narrow it down and do more of actual research question. So how can you develop your research ideas? So here's you have some types of phenomenon. So for example, you study spontaneously occurring events, so intensive case study or extrapolate from questions already studied. You can see that you may study the behavior of a friend who consistently performs well in athletic or fitness related events and see if their strategies work for others. Or researchers have investigated the effect of creatine on muscle force production. What remains to be answered, though, is whether experienced weightlifters respond similarly to inexperienced weightlifters, for example. So, you know, you study spontaneously occurring events, or you could study the validity of everyday beliefs, reverse the direction of common sense beliefs. For example, a common belief is people don't exercise because they are uneducated on the benefits of exercise. You could investigate whether this is true by measuring exercise knowledge among exercisers and non-exercisers alike. Or what about evaluating formal if-then statements? For example, use hypothetical deductive method. If A is true, then B should be true. For example, people are less likely to adhere to an exercise program where exercise intensity is prescribed, in other words, no choice, then they are more likely to adhere to an exercise program where exercise intensity is self-selected. They have a choice of what they want to do. Therefore, they take ownership of it. You could use previous research as a stepping stone. This is a very common way of developing research ideas. So you bring together areas of research that originally were unrelated. So for example, research from different fields can come together for researchers who would like to apply concepts from one field to the other. For instance, theories developed for education or other health behaviors, such as smoking cessation, have been adopted to help explain, predict, and promote physical activity. A more contemporary example is the use of SARMs to promote muscle hypertrophy and performance, whereas they were initially developed to prevent reduced sarcopenia and osteopenia, which is loss of muscle mass. So the idea is that you're essentially taking potentially an idea from another field and saying, I wonder if this could also be applied to our field. Test a theory. Self-efficacy theory proposes an individual who sees a peer model perform well in a task will feel more confident in their own ability to perform the task. We could assess a participant's self-efficacy for an exercise-related task before or after seeing a peer model perform the task successfully. For example, you may have a friend that goes to the gym or exercises 3 days a week. After observing them, for example, you could test the theory of observing them could improve someone else at exercise adherence who may not normally go. So anyway, these are some examples how you can develop your research ideas. Here's an example of potential research projects. You have a current situation. Lack of free time is the most reported barrier to exercise, but there are differences in the way people conceptualize free time. Recommendations for related research. How much time do people spend engaged in various activities throughout a typical week? You can measure how do conceptualizations of free time of regular exercises compared to non-exercises. Do they have a different viewpoint on terms of exercise? Are there differences in scheduling self-efficacy? In other words, the confidence and ability to make time for exercise between regular exercises and non-exercises? If so, why? So in other words, do exercisers tend to have a better conceptualization of making the time for exercise versus the non-exercises, and what is it? Why is that the case? If it is the case, then you tease out, you start to ask questions about why that might be. Current situation. Postmenopausal women have a greater prevalence of normal weight obesity than premenopausal women. Well, why could that be? Here's some examples of some related research. What is the influence of hormone replacement therapy on body composition among postmenopausal women? What is the influence of regular aerobic exercise on body composition among postmenopausal women with or without hormone replacement therapy? What is the influence of resistance exercise on body composition among postmenopausal women with or without hormone replacement therapy? Or what influence does race, ethnicity have on the risk of developing normal weight obesity in postmenopausal women? So these are just some examples from the larger situation of looking at postmenopausal women in terms of having a greater prevalence of normal weight obesity than premenopausal women. So why are one group of individuals more overweight than another group of individuals? Now, the role of replication research. A single study cannot definitely answer all of our questions about a topic. So you see multiple research studies done on a particular topic. Research studies are imperfect and often leave unanswered questions or raise new ones. That's why we need replication, which is the act of reproducing a previous study to see if its results can be replicated. Exact replication. Researchers repeats a previous study exactly the same way. That's why they'll go to the method section of that particular research study, and they'll go ahead and perform that research exactly how that study was done. You could replication with extension, which is something that I encourage you to do. Researcher repeats all aspects of the previous study, but adds something new to the study. So by research, usually there's always going to be areas that, the next steps. So usually you read a research article, you find out what they did, you want to replicate it, but you know what, let's add something else to this, for example. So like the next step, what's the next step, the logical sequence of what would be the next step in terms of progressing this research question. Conceptual replication. Researchers attempts to answer the same research question, but use a different approach. So, for example, that you want to talk about why do individuals gain muscle mass Potentially doing resistance training using free weights versus resistance training using bands, for example. You might do the same number of sets and reps, but your modality, or you have a different approach that you're doing. The function of replication studies, check the reliability of research results. We'll talk about that. The reliability, how sure can you repeat that over and over again and get the same results? Provide additional support for theories, increase constructability, which we're going to talk more about, making, in other words, constructability, essentially, are you actually measuring what you say you're going to measure? Protect against fraud. Obviously, in that particular case, you want to make sure that there's anything that might come in. People might say that is not valid or is not true to what you say you're going to do. And that just comes down to really good methodology. And we're going to talk about how to do that later on. Exact replication studies are beneficial but rarely seen. Journals may be reluctant to publish replication. I mean, if you actually did the study, it's already been done once. Most studies, do exactly the same thing. You want to learn from what they did, and you come up with the next question based on what their results might have been. Every research is going to come up with a new additional questions. Research may be reluctant to submit replications for publication. Original research is encouraged. And that's usually, again, you read through the literature, which is what you're going to do. You're going to come up with some ideas based on what people have already done and say, how can I build off this? Original research is encouraged. Funding may be limited for exact replication because it's already been funded once, potentially. Previous studies may lack information needed for a replication. So there may not be enough information about how people did their methodology. So it's important. Again, the idea is really to come up with your original idea using reading the literature, seeing what people have done, and coming up with additional questions about how to advance that research. But there is no need to reinvent the wheel. Replicate, but with extension. So again, find out what people have done, use their methodology, but then answer a new question, but based on what people have already done. Need to know what researchers have already done. Avoid making the same mistakes as previous researchers. Usually there's always a limitations, like the limitations of this study was this, in the research article. If you read that, that'll kind of give you some idea about potential things that they would have done differently. That's a good way to do potentially the next study. You can borrow someone else's methodology, as we mentioned before, but again, with an extension. Published research has been evaluated by experts and editors. So the nice thing about published research in these peer-reviewed journals is that other people outside of who did the research, outside of who actually did the study, have looked at it and said, this was good. Have you considered this? This is a good study. Let's go ahead and publish it. So you know that was a sound research study. You can learn a lot about what to do and what not to do by reviewing the literature. And we're going to talk more about that as we go along the course. And that's hopefully one of the main context of this course is really to understand what is good research and what is not good research. And that'll help with generating a good idea for your study or for your project. All right, so that hopefully this video gives you some idea about, start to think about what article or what research proposal that you want to do. Give it some thought, and especially you want to start the assignments as we go through are going to help build on those ideas in terms of coming up with an idea. How would you come up with this X, Y, and Z? And hopefully will build over the next couple of weeks towards your actual research proposal. So you kind of build, each week builds on itself.